Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. How are you? Wherever you may be. I had an impression when I just awoke. I just got up. I haven't even, I've taken a shower, but I haven't had my coffee yet. And that's where I'm getting ready to have my coffee. But I had certain things that were, I was thinking about. I didn't really want to broadcast. I wasn't really anxious about broadcasting this morning until I awakened and I began to think about a few things. This is what I was thinking about. I was watching YouTube yesterday, and the president of the Southern Sudan was standing up in a ceremony. You know, there was a big ceremony in South Sudan, and the president of Sudan, I don't know his name, but he's the president, and I'm sure he's not a young fellow, and I'll show you why he's not. I know he's not a young fellow. When they were having this great ceremony in South Sudan, they had all the soldiers, dignitaries all lined up, and the cameraman. It's really these guys who own the cameras. They're devilish. And the things that I guess sometimes these cameras are taken from these journalists, these cameramen, I think it's justifiable. I'll tell you why I think it's justifiable. Because sometimes men can be very cruel and disrespectful. But then, even though men can be cruel and disrespectful, then other men should be mindful of reality and to accept reality as it is. Let's get back to the South Sudanese president. He was standing like the soldiers stand, and you hear the music play, and there's a great big ceremony. And the thing is, the cameraman, whoever was doing the shot, he did a very close up on the president of South Sudan. The president of the South Sudan was urinating on himself. You could actually see the water pass between his legs, and you can see his pants getting wet. And the thing about it, the guy who was doing the shot, he was narrating. He said he's urinating, and he's talking about the South Sudanese president, a president of a country of millions of human beings. Well, we all are human. I mean, we know we have to relieve ourselves, but I'm looking at two. I'm looking at two things that should be dealt with. One is the cameraman, the journalist who took the photo and reported on the president of South Sudan and actually showing him urinating on himself as he's standing in the crowd. I think that was disrespectful. Okay. I think that was extremely disrespectful. And the thing is, I, we have to be kind in this world because when we do when we do things that are mischievous, are things that really insults the character of particular human beings, especially a dignitary, the president of a country, and you are the cameraman who takes that photograph of his actually urinating on himself and you report it. I think that's an issue in journalism. That's an issue in ethics. We as human beings, we as people who are in the media, we have to be more respectful because it is so true. It is so true. What comes around goes around. So next thing you know, these are the possibilities. These are the probabilities. These are the realities. In many cases, as the journalists have problems here in Africa. I mean, they're kidnapped, they're murdered. So the thing is, We have to take responsibility of what actions we take. We have to have some type of feeling for the other man. We must have compassion. And perhaps the way we as African people, perhaps the way that we treat our leaders, the way that we treat our leadership in some cases, it's quite disrespectful. It's quite disrespectful. And we have to determine in our own mind what is ethical, what is the right thing to do. Okay, that's part of it, of this discussion. There was a president, he's deceased, but he was the president of, it's really something. Me being, me, I'm like the rest of the world. Me being a senior citizen, I have my issues with remembering names and names that I should remember, and and I can't even think of the country. But uh, maybe in this, and in a minute, the name of the president, his name will come to mind as I talk about him. That was a wonderful president. We had in one of the countries in Southeast Africa. Uh, I remember I grew up with this man. He's deceased, but I, it's really something. He was like a and when I was growing up, he was like a hero, just like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, and he was the president of this country in Southeast Africa. Um, I can remember the things that he did before he died. And maybe as I talk about him, his name will come to me. But it's a shame that I cannot recall his name. But I do remember he was like a hero for African Americans when he became the president of this country. The country used to be called Rhodesia, but then that country, he changed that name to an African name. And he ruled that country for many, many years. And as he approached his latter life, I think he was in his close to 100 years old when he died, but he was in his 90s when he died. But what happened, he was trying to give the government over to his girlfriend. He had a young girl, you know, or he had a young lady. He was like 90 years old, and he had a beautiful young lady. I guess she was like 40 years younger than he was. So what he was doing as he was approaching death, he was sort of giving the government to this beautiful young lady, and she was going to have all the money and all the power when he died. But then his government called him and they said, no, 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 you're not going to do this. And they shipped him to some Middle Eastern country, and he died in that country. Um, but we, the elders, the old people, you know, we have a problem too. Now, I'm talking about two presidents right now, one who's deceased and one who was peeing on himself, and the cameraman caught him and broadcasted it on YouTube. When we reach a certain age, I'm talking about the old men like me and like myself. When we get old, we must step aside. We must step aside. We must step aside and let the young men in. Here's an old man standing up. I know what the issue is. The South Sudanese president who was standing with the in the settlement and peeing on himself. I know that what the issue is. Probably had a prostate problem. We men, when we get a certain age, we have prostate issues. The man cannot hold his water. He shouldn't have been standing there in the first place. Mr. South Sudanese president, you shouldn't have been standing there in the first place. Why don't you retire? Why do you have to be a tyrant? Why do you have to be a dictator? Let the young men come in. Step aside. Step aside. And that's one of the problems that we as African people, that's one of our problems. Leadership does not recognize that it's time for them to just go home, sit in your mansion and drink your tea, and get out of the way of these of time. And these guys, they become presidents, and they want to be presidents 40, 50, 60 years. 60 years. You're going to be the boss for 60 years. Step aside. Oh my goodness. If we remember Omar Mama Gaddafi, he must have ruled Libya, what, 30, 40 years? 10 years was all he needed. But look how he went down. We black African people, we African men, we sometimes are very foolish. Sometimes we should just stay at home and let the young men take over. But no, we want to hold on to a kingdom 40 years, 60 years. And then we suffer the humiliations. We suffer the humiliations that we create for ourselves for being so selfish and foolish. As we age, certain things happen to the body and the mind. We, as African men, we must understand that there's a beginning and an end. Let the young men, let the young people rule. Let them come in. And then we would not have to suffer these ridiculous, this is ridiculous. He is a president of the South Sudan, peeing on himself in public, the cameraman called it. Okay, I question the ethics of the cameraman, but I also question the ethics of the Sudanese old man who's a dictator of the country. Step down. It's time for us to rest. I mean, we're born, we develop, and we die. So I still haven't recalled the president. And see, I'm only a part of the reality of as we age. I can't remember his name. Whereas he was a hero. He was an African leader who just died within the last 2 or 3 years. And the country that he was the president of used to be called Rhodesia. And then he took over and they changed the name of the country to an African name. And he did wonderful things for black people. He did great things for black people. He was black, the cream of the crop. And we would just talk about him in America, African Americans, how this black man is taking over Rhodesia, changed the name, and black people are advancing. But when he got to be 90 years old, he had this young girl, young woman as his lover. And he tried to give the country to the country to the young lady. That was a violation. And that's basically because, when we age, we should just step aside. Let the young people in. I'm saying this to the old leaders. Let the young people in. Get out the way. Get out the way. My goodness. This is my recommendation to all the leaders in Africa who run the country for 4 or 5 years, and then they say, "Oh, I want to run again. I want to be president for 10 years, 20 years." I tell you what you should do: go by your go by the Constitution, which says that you're only supposed to go so many years, and just get your YouTube station You know, that ego thing. Get your YouTube station and you can talk to the world. This is Musa, Matt Meacham Jr. signing out.